And I realized like, oh, the only thing that has led to all of this stuff for me is not stopping when I had the idea. And I think that's what most people do. And I just was like, I'm going to try it.
You talk about it privately, we talk about it publicly. This is the Real Estate Insiders Unfiltered podcast.
Welcome again to the Real Estate Insiders Unfiltered podcast. I'm your host, James Dwiggins, along with my co-host, Mr. Keith Crazy Uncle Robinson, based upon the title of his slide, of his screen. Keith, talk to us about Kyle Scheele, who's the international, you have to give context to that, international speaker and author. He's so funny.
He's hilarious. Yeah. Yes. And we had him speak for our company, and our vice president of marketing couldn't help but say his name in a fun and playful way. So we had, 1,100 people shout out in a fun and playful way, which was a great way to set the stage for him and actually for this conversation, because he's hilarious, brilliant, and creative. And we spent a lot of energy and time talking about the power of creativity, how to tap into it, how to find it, the importance and benefit of storytelling, and how as human beings, we're going to remember stories, not statistics, and just sort of touching back into the humanness of who we are and doing it in a fun and playful way. Oh, and the joys of bird feeding, which is, I don't know if I'm ordering that book. Sorry, Kyle. Yeah. But you'll dig it. Put it in yours, kids. It's a great one.
Kyle, welcome to the podcast. For viewers and listeners to know in advance, I have the flu. I sound like shit and I feel like shit, but I'm here anyway. We are not going to miss out having Kyle on the show because you are in for a treat. I will simply preface, I saw Kyle for the first time doing his one of his keynotes at Inman. I laughed so hard I had to leave the room, and it was and I'm not kidding, he was one of the funniest people I've seen on stage. So Kyle, thank you for being here. We're excited. I think a good starting point is just tell everybody a little bit about your background. And I know we'll dive into a lot of stuff today and the books you're doing and things like that, but we'll just start with that and give everybody a little bit of background on who you are and how you got to be this incredible keynote speaker and author and everything else. So
a friend of mine named Hugh Weber, who sadly passed away recently, he called me the patron saint of crazy ideas. And I think that's probably the best way to sum up my last 20 years or so of my life is just, I chased crazy ideas and started companies and ended up being a keynote speaker for about the last 14 years. I spent a little over a decade of that in the youth speaking world. So I did tons of high school assemblies and leadership conferences and talking to young people. And then within the last year or two, I've made the transition into the corporate world, where I talk a lot about creativity and innovation and how do you build a culture where you get the best ideas out of your people.
It is awesome to hear you talk about these things, and you inject a lot of humor into your content, which is great. What was the one that I just had to bring? What was the one where you incorporate the horse with the bike that you did? That was this crazy.
Oh yeah, I bought a tandem bicycle. And
it's a Centaur, I believe, not a horse, right?
Yeah, it's half horse.
Let's get it right, James. Let's get it correct.
I'm sick. Give me a break. So, yeah.
I bought a tandem bike, so like a 2-seat bicycle, where they're kind of front to back, like one person's riding in front of the other person. And I chopped the back seat off, and where that back seat had been, I built a horse's butt out of metal and covered it in fur, and then I bolted the legs to the back pedals so that when the front pedals move, so when you sit on the front of the bike and you pedal it, it looks like you're a centaur. And your feet are moving and the horse's legs are moving and the whole thing.
We'll link to a video in the show notes. Yeah. It is
it's kind of hard to describe, but
it is, but it's amazing.
I ended up putting a motor on it. And actually, it's right now, I've donated that bike to a children's museum that is going to build a whole display around it in my town. They gave me a tour of this museum and the guy was like, "Hey, we love your work." He's like, we'd love to do something together. And then he said, "I love your Centaur bike." And I was like, "Do you want to have it?" Because it's huge and it's taking up a lot of space in my garage. And so that was like a real win-win, because my wife was every time she would have to park next to it, she was going, "What's the long-term plan with this Centaur bike?" And I didn't really know. And
You're
so
like,
now I'm able to
honey,
say,
I
well,
don't-
it's going in a museum,
Museum.
where it belongs.
Right, as it should be, the Smithsonian.
Yeah.
I just love the fact when you shared that story and you brought the bike home, your wife was like all excited about having a tandem bike that you guys could ride together. And you're like, no,
Oh
that's
yeah,
not what
she
this
was
is about.
so
Yeah.
like, this is going to
Yeah.
be so sweet,
Yeah.
you know,
So
like
romantic.
dates in the park, and we'll put a basket on it and all of this. And I was like, no, I've got other plans for this bike.
No, she's long suffering, isn't she? Yeah.
She is. Yeah, she's great. I think at this point she's just kind of like, whatever,
Surrendered.
like
Surrendered.
Yeah, I think that's what's the stage of grief that she's in right now, and I think it's acceptance. And she's kind of gotten to the point where she's just like, oh, cool, Kyle's doing another weird thing, and
Can it not
she
fill up the
actually
garage
says
this
that-
time, honey?
Yeah, she says that the things that whenever I pitch an idea to her and she doesn't get it, that's usually the one that's going to work. Because in the past, I pitched ideas and I've been like, what if I did this? And she's like, I don't know. And then that's like the one that blows up. So she's just kind of like, you do your thing and I'll be here to support you.
Nice.
I love it.
Well, we'll do the quick rapid fire. I'll do the first one. We ask these of all of our guests. Just as a quick reminder, on this first question, we collate and compile the list, and you can find it on the website if you want to know which podcast or book, or if you're looking for something to listen to. So, your favorite book or podcast this year, in the last month, ever, whatever. Not a ton of rules here, but your favorite book or podcast and why.
Okay, so this is going to be a weird one. Usually, my favorite book is whatever book I just finished or I'm currently in. And the one that I just finished, which is it's a strange one, but it's called I think it's called The Joy of Bird Feeding, and it's literally just about like bird feeding, and it's from the guy who started Wild Birds Unlimited. And so I love a deep.
I've met him.
Oh my gosh! I'm starstruck. I wish I were you, because I love a deep dive. I love anytime somebody takes a subject that you're like, yeah, I know about that. Like, you know, like bird. How hard can it be? You put some seeds in a tube and you hang it like on a hook or whatever. And this book is this thick, and it's like it just deep dives into everything. And this guy, like, he got into bird feeding, and then he would go to stores like box stores and like Walmart or Lowe's or whatever, and buy their bird feed. And then he would separate it all out and figure out like what's actually in this, and then what are birds actually eating out of this. Because if you buy like tons of bird feed from a regular store, you'll notice that there's just like stuff all over the ground by the bird feeders. And that's because a lot of that stuff, birds don't actually eat it. They don't want that, but it's cheaper to put that in there. And then he like evaluated, how do you like, why do these pull systems that you get at the store like bend in half and they break and they fall over, or squirrels knock them down? And so this dude has like multiple patents that are around bird feeders and bird houses and bird technology. And so I just love a deep dive. And so I then went and spent way too much money at Wild Birds Unlimited, and now have this like incredible bird feeder set up in my backyard.
I don't know what I thought your answer would be to your favorite book.
But you didn't think it was going to be that?
No, I did not. That's
be The Joy of Bird Feeding.
That is.
Oh man.
I'm actually wondering if I'm hallucinating right now, but I'm going to go with it. So
that's the flu. This is all a fever dream.
Well, at least we know he sold a couple copies of that book.
Yeah,
that's
and
right.
you apparently bought them.
Right.
So are you going to do something fun around the bird feeder setup in your backyard is the next question. Like, do you have anything planned?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh yeah. I've definitely thought about it. Like there's a YouTuber named Mark Rober who's like huge, and he did a whole like squirrel obstacle course thing in his backyard during the pandemic. And I've thought like, oh, what could I do with birds and in my backyard and make them, how could I train them? I actually do have an idea written down, because crows, you can train crows to bring you things. Like if you feed them like peanuts and stuff,
like dollar bills.
They'll bring you coins. They'll bring you like shiny things that they find. And so I thought, how could I automate that? And I thought maybe I could make like a little thing that shows the crows pictures of me and then dispenses treats so that I don't actually have to be there. And then I just can like earn their allegiance easily.
Remotely. And then when you come home, you just go in the backyard and put your arms out, and these crows
and
just
then
flock
they
to
just
you.
like flock to me. Like on Halloween, imagine like just having like it's called a murder of crows, like gathered around me. There is one idea in the book though it's about how to feed birds by hand. I know this is the hard hitting real estate content you're looking for.
This is exactly the content that they come to Real Estate Insiders
but
for.
they have this thing where they're like, it's not that hard to feed birds by hand, but you have to get them used to you. And so like you start by dressing a mannequin or a dummy or something in your clothes and having it sit out there and then have its hand held out and put seed in it. And you just leave it there for like a day or two until the birds get used to it. And then you just sneak out there and sit there. And so I think I'm going to do a YouTube video about that at some point.
So in case anybody hasn't figured this out, who's listening, Kyle is one of the most creative
unhinged.
and unhinged individuals you're going to meet, and hilarious because he'll talk about a lot of this stuff, but you'll have context too. Great marketing ideas that went viral is what Kyle is known for. So we'll add some context to it. Let me get through this less rapid fire before we go off the deep end.
Too late.
Literally, lunch with if you could have lunch with one person, current or historical, who would it be? Who would you pick?
I would have, this is like a sad one, but I would say my uncle Ronnie. So my uncle passed away about a decade ago, and he was just like one of my favorite people. And he was my godfather. So he was always like in my corner and always cheering me on and stuff. And his wife, my aunt, has said a bunch of times like, oh, I wish he could have seen some of this stuff that you've done in the last 10 years. And so I just would like to sit down with him one more time and
that's cool.
Catch up and tell him what I've been doing and
thank him.
Yeah,
right?
Thank you. And if you met with him, he'd just look and be like, you're such an idiot and I love you because your shit's hilarious. Yeah. He's watching down going, that was a good one, Kyle. So, all right, Keith.
Absolutely.
It's surprising. We ask this question of every guest, and we obviously get the common ones, some famous philosopher or Jesus or whoever, but the most common response is usually some loved one that's gone that they wish that they could share with. There's something about that connectivity, especially for those people who
there totally is. I think about I travel a lot for my job as a speaker, and I've been to every state but Hawaii. I'm going to Hawaii this year, and people always ask me what's the best town that you've been to, or what's the coolest city that you've been to? And I always tell them you're not going to like this answer, but it's anywhere I know a person, because every town, if you're just there for a day and you're in a hotel, it's it feels kind of the same. Sure. But if it's a place where I know someone and I can go get dinner with them or meet their family or take a walk around their favorite place, it's all about human connection.
Yeah. That's a good one. That's true.
So you've got a slogan of sorts. I don't know that Kyle Scheele could actually have a slogan, but if he did, it would go something like, I believe in crazy ideas and you should, and so should you.
Yeah. That's on my website. That's my website header.
Yeah. Where did that ethos sort of come from? I know, I've heard your story. I know you did some crazy stuff in high school, but how did that manifest itself in Kyle Scheele so deeply?
I think for me, it was realizing, and this is a relatively recent realization, maybe within the last couple of years, as I looked back at my entire life, I realized all of the best things in my life, all the biggest moments of impact and change, all the biggest opportunities, all the coolest stories, they all came on the other side of a crazy idea. And so I've just realized that so many of the things, when I tell all these stories on stage or wherever, once you hear the story, you're oh, that's so wild, what happened? But if you just heard the first part, if I just pitched you the idea, you'd be there's no way that's ever going to work. And and I've realized the only thing that has led to all of this stuff for me is not stopping when I had the idea. And I think that's what most people do. And I just was I'm going to try it. And so, seeing that play out in my own life and in the lives of other people, it's just made me I'm all in on crazy ideas. And I'm very just pro crazy ideas. And so I want to encourage other people to chase their own.
I want to follow up on that. So because people don't do things out of fear. They're fear of rejection. Somebody's going to say something, they're going to get judged, whatever. That's how most people operate. So how many ideas have you done that have succeeded versus failed or didn't live up to the expectation you wanted, for context?
I don't know. I don't really track that. Someone asked me that the other day, and I was I don't really track that because one, I don't really give up on an idea permanently very often where I'm oh, I'll never do this. What usually happens is I have 5 or 10 ideas that are in various states of production. And so sometimes I'm like, I get really excited about an idea and then I'm working on it. I mean, right now, like I'm just looking around my office and I have like, I don't know, 3 or 4 or 5 different projects that like I don't talk about on stage. Some of them are things that are like pretty much done, but I haven't decided what I'm going to do with it or how I'm going to tell that story. And then other ones are one that I'm like, I've just been kind of tinkering with it for a year or 2 or 5 or whatever. So, I don't think of it like, oh, this thing failed miserably, unless it's like, oh, this thing backfired in my face or something. That's happened before. But I think mostly just, I don't keep track of like successes and failures.
Well, that's great. And I want to dig deeper on that because I think the psychology is what I'm trying to get to, is that you have these ideas and you sound like you have the mindset, like I'm going to do them and I just don't give a shit whether people like it or not. Like this is what I want to do. And I'm going to keep working at it until I get to do what I want. And I think that a lot of people don't have that trait. They talk themselves out of doing things because they're worried about what people will say or whether it will work or not. And what motivates you?
I think for me, I've learned that the joy is in the doing of the thing. Like I really like making the thing and going through the creative process. And then I like telling people the story of it later. And I've seen like there are projects that I've done where, and every creator who puts out stuff consistently will tell you the same story, that there's some project they worked so hard on and they thought this was going to be the one that like really popped off. And then they launched it and it was just crickets. And then there was some other project that they just like really quick shot a video of like, oh, look at this funny thing I just did. And it just like blew up and went viral.
Yeah.
And I like, there's no real connection between how well something does on the internet and like how much impact that actually has in the real world. And so I just think like I want to make things that I really want to make and the kind of ideas that keep me up at night and that like that I sort of almost have to do it. And I like just to figure out what's going to happen. If it does really well online or something, that's great. But I always want to pursue projects that even if no one else cares about it, like I will still think it's funny and I'll still be glad that I did it.
I love it.
So you've kind of been blessed with that compulsion to want to complete it for completing it. I don't know that everyone has that. And so, or maybe they do, but they haven't tapped into the right place. So if there's someone who maybe struggles with pushing through to that uncomfortably creative place, would you give them any advice for like, it's so, it's too cavalier to say, well, just be scared, but do it anyway. Right. Or if no fear, then there is no courage, or whatever stupid quote we want to pull off the internet for it. But like, how do you really push through it and put yourself out there in that way?
So I used to do these, when I was speaking in like the high school world, I would do public speaking workshops a lot of times because I was a professional speaker, and they would go, hey, while you're here, could you talk to some of our kids about speaking in public? And I always told them, I was like, I can cure your public speaking woes in 5 words. And those 5 words are nobody cares about my speech, or nobody cares about your speech. And I would have them like chant that out loud. And I was always like worried that was when the client was going to walk in, was when I had all these kids going, nobody cares about my speech.
You're just organizing a rebellion in high schools across the U.S.
Yeah. And it was funny because it was kind of like this cathartic thing where they were chanting it. And then I would always clarify and I would go, listen, I just want to be clear. I'm not saying nobody cares about your speech because you're just a lowly high schooler and I'm a professional speaker. I was like, nobody cares about my speech either. And I would tell them, like, usually this would be after I had done an assembly or a speech or keynote or something and they had seen it. And I would ask them, like, how many of you guys woke up this morning and you were like, man, I'm really worried for Kyle. Like, I'm so nervous about this speech. And like, nobody raised their hand. I was like, yeah, none of you even knew I was coming. Like, I had all this nerve of, or could, I don't really get that. But I'm like, I could have been so nervous about, oh, how's it going to go today? I'm like, and the reality is, if I had totally bombed on stage, most people would have just been like, yeah, that's what I expected. Like when you have a school assembly speaker, you kind of expect it's not going to be very good. And the same thing is true, when I go speak at a corporate conference, like the reality is a lot of the stuff that happens on stage at corporate conferences is like the audience is halfway asleep and they don't care, or the audio isn't good enough. Like, so, I mean, the expectation, they're hungover. The expectation is so low. And so I would always just tell them, no one's thinking about you. And that's freeing. Like, don't take that as like, oh, I don't matter. But kind of like, hey, if I bomb this, it's fine. Like the world will move on. And I would even ask them, I would go, how many of you guys have ever been in a class where you had to give a speech before? They would all raise their hands. And I would go, can anyone tell me one thing that someone else in that class said during their speech? And there was just crickets. And I'm like, yeah, because what were you doing the whole time everyone else is speaking? You were worried about your own speech. Like, how's it going to go? And how did it go? And so I think that that's just like the case is that when you're like, oh, I'm so afraid of what could happen. The reality is like the stakes are so like in your favor, where if something goes well, everybody's impressed by it. And if it bombs, nobody really cares. And most people won't even know about it. I had an experience years ago where I took this guy out to lunch. And I used to do this when I had more time. Like anytime I would hear about somebody cool that was doing something creative in my town, I would just cold outreach to that person and be like, hey, I'm trying to meet more cool people here. Can I take you out to lunch? So I took this guy out to lunch, and halfway through the lunch, he goes, oh, I know who you are. He's like, you're the guy that did, and he mentioned this Kickstarter project that I had done that had been like an abject, colossal failure, just like completely flopped. I had worked so hard on it. And when he said that, I was like, oh man, this is like the end of our friendship.
Here
like,
we go.
Me as this failure. And I was like, man, don't judge me on that. You know, that was a long time ago. And he could tell I was like, kind of like doing that. And he goes, defensive, well, why? Like, why are you worried about that? And I was like, oh, it was like a huge failure. Like it totally flopped. And he goes, oh, I didn't know that. He's like, I just saw it when you launched it and I thought it was a cool idea. And he's like, I didn't really track it closely.
Right.
And he was like, I just thought it was cool that you even did it. And I think that's what people forget is that like, even if you fail, the right people are going to be like, man, I'm just proud of you for even trying it.
Yeah.
And if there are people out there that are like, haha, it failed, you suck. Like those people like are showing you who they are. And you should just kind of like, okay, well, cool. I don't want that kind of person in my life. So thanks for, raising your hand. But yeah, people want to support you.
Yeah. They're telling you who they are and you should listen. Right.
Yeah, exactly.
They're being very vocal. You're an amazingly creative person. How much of that is nature and how much of that is nurture? What I mean by that is how much of that have you just always been this, you were the crazy creative kid who was coloring on the walls or whatever. And then how much is learned or developed and you're like, no, I have this skill set, but I want to know how to tap into my superpower when I need it. So how much is you and how much is learned?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think if I'm honest with you, I do think I'm more innately creative than the average person. I was at an event this weekend with a bunch of people, and it was in San Francisco, and it was like every night it gets super windy, like when the wind comes off the bay or back to the Bay Area. We know it was like super windy. Yeah. I mean, like just huge, like people's women's hair was just like blowing sideways, and everyone's getting knocked over and stuff. And everyone is like, just they're cold and they're wrapping up and they're talking about how windy it is. And I turned to my friend and I was like, and me without a kite. And she was like, what? And I was like, oh, like, wouldn't it be cool if we had a kite right now? And I kept bringing that up all week. And she's like, Kyle, I think you're the only person who thought, oh, I need a kite right now. And like at one point I texted her, it was super windy and I just wrote my kingdom for a kite. And so like, I think that there is like something broken and bent inside of me that like sees things from an odd angle. But
the next picture is Kyle with a plastic bag being pulled down the street on a skateboard.
Oh, dude, I mean, I was at this event for 3 days and it was just like there were shuttles from the hotel to the event. And I kept looking for like, is there a place nearby either of these? Because I didn't have a car. I'm like, where I can get a kite. And I never ended up getting a kite. But I think that like, it's both those things. Like I started out having this unique perspective. And then I also just got that reinforced. Like when I would show somebody, oh, look at this thing how I see the world. And they would laugh or they would get a good response. And so like it kind of, I learned that over time. But I also think that fundamentally, like I really very, very strongly believe that all of us are creative, that's just a part of being a human being is coming up with new things, solving new problems, combining old things and trying something new, looking at things from different angles. And so I think that we have really narrowly defined creative, the word creative to mean artists, designers, musicians, there's like this creative economy or whatever, this creative title. But the reality is like, if you open a new Word document, that is a creative act. You have created something. If you open a new spreadsheet, if you go file a new LLC, if you start a new real estate brokerage, whatever, like those are creative acts too. And it's the same process. You're just taking old things, combining them in new ways, trying to look at them from different angles. And so I want to I have learned to be more creative. And I also I'm very curious about the creative process. And so I am constantly asking other people hey, how do you see the world? What does it feel like when you have an idea? And I want to be able to take that and translate it for people who would not naturally think of themselves as creative.
What I think is interesting is the way your brain operates, though, because like I think about what you did with the marathon during COVID or whatever, and you should tell everybody a quick story on that. But just you thinking about, well, let's take a traditional marathon and just turn it on its head. You look at things from a humor perspective, and I think that's refreshing because there's not enough of it going on, and you kind of look at an idea and go, how can I make fun of it, but in a way that people will find joy and humor in this too. And I'm surprised you haven't been canceled yet, by the way, just so you know. So
I have actually been canceled, but that's a whole other story.
That story
for another time.
Tell us the marathon story, because it's great testament hilarious. To creativity. Tell us that
so
story.
The first time I did it was way before COVID. It was back in 2012, and
that's right. Yeah,
I have this friend named Grant, and Grant was always running marathons. And like all marathon runners, he's not content to just ruin his own life. He like also wants to bring everyone else into this downward spiral. And so he was always just like, Kyle, dude, when are you going to do it? You got to run a marathon. And I was like, no, thanks, dude. I have like no interest in that. And then one time he was like, dude, it's so cool to be able to say that you've done it. Like, that's the appeal. Like, to be able to say that you've done you've run a marathon. What an amazing accomplishment. And when he said that, I was like, okay, fine. Then I'll say that I've run a marathon. Like that's the best part of it. And he was like, well, no, that's not what I meant. But that kind of got me thinking, because he said, well, no one would believe you if you just all of a sudden out of nowhere said that you've run a marathon. So I thought, like, well, how hard would it be to get people to believe me? And I realized it wouldn't be that hard. Like, you'd just have to get a race bib and a T-shirt and a medal, so it looked like you ran a marathon, and hang those on the wall of your house, and then have a picture of yourself looking miserable like you're running a marathon. And then there would have to be like some social proof of if you Google whatever marathon and nothing comes up, like, people will be suspicious. So maybe put together a website or something. And so I just thought, this wouldn't be that hard. I should see if anyone else wants to do this. And so I put together this fake marathon. And the idea was like, you sign up, you pay a registration fee, and then I'll just send you a race bib to your house that has your name on it. I'll send you a T-shirt, I'll send you a medal, and then you don't have to run. And then you go outside and you take a picture of yourself pretending to run, and like maybe spritz yourself with some water and like try to look sad, and then post that on social media. And then we'll put together like a race website. And I found a spreadsheet of like New York Marathon finishing times, and I just took all their names off it and put our names on there. And I thought like maybe we could get 100 people to sign up, and we ended up getting 1,000 people.
Did you pay for placement? Like, if I wanted to finish in the top 5, could I pay extra?
Oh yeah, it was a blatant cash grab. The more money that you gave me, the better your time was. That was just like from the beginning. It was like a weighted combination of how early you backed the project and how much you backed. And so, like the more money you gave, the better your time was.
You had 1,000 people sign up for it to be part of it, is what you said?
Yeah, from 24 different countries. And Groupon ended up sponsoring the race, and it was in Runner's World magazine. And it was just this crazy experience. And so we have pictures, like, because we were in 24 different countries, we have pictures in our race bibs of people running like underneath the Eiffel Tower and in front of across the Golden Gate Bridge and through the Yale University Art Gallery and at Disneyland and Gyeongbokgung Palace and like all of these different places with our little race bibs on it. And so
that is so funny.
So we did that in 2012, and then when the pandemic hit in 2020, I was like, I should try this again, and that time we got 34,477 people signed up, and the Washington Post wrote like a whole like full-length article about it. And it was just this really, really kind of cool experience. The thing about the marathon, you expect, it's kind of this like poking fun at marathon runners thing, but it actually became this really like kind of magical moment where people got together to create content around this thing that wasn't real. And so we just asked people like, go outside, take a picture of yourself pretending to run and post it on social media. But people like before the race were posting like their training regimens and stuff. And like, people were like carb loading before the race. And you'd have somebody like on a treadmill, and you'd see them like running, like just a shot of them, and then like a shot of like their arms kind of going back and forth, and then the camera would pan down and their feet would be like on the side of the treadmill, like not standing on the thing, and the belt would just be going like this or whatever. And then like during the race, like people set up aid stations, and like They would pour out like 100 cups of water and cut up bananas and stuff. And people made signs and they made their kids hold the signs up. And so like, if you were to watch it from the outside, you'd be like, oh, this is a real marathon, which is kind of the whole point, was just
of it.
Like, is this even possible to fool people like this? And it went so well. But then you also created this like community, especially the second time we did it, which was during the pandemic. And so everyone was in lockdown. And this was like the one thing that you could do that felt like it was this big public outside event, but it wasn't. You're just at your own house. And so there were these like rivalries that developed, and people kind of somebody would post a funny video and someone else would stitch that video. And there's these trends that happen, and people from all over the world that like for at least one day were able to kind of take their mind off what was happening with the pandemic and just like enjoy this ridiculous kind of expression.
Well, I love that it started from an idea of kind of making fun of your friend, and it, launched into this massive thing with massive media. And you're adding humor to it, and you're also just having fun, and people want to have fun and have humor. Are there any other projects you're working on you're willing to share that you've got some ideas on? Just curious.
Oh man, I have so many stupid.
It'll be our little secret.
I'm like looking at several right now. So there's one that I've been working on for, I had this idea probably almost a decade ago. I have this friend named Ryan, and Ryan was born, he's a congenital amputee. So he was born with one hand. His left arm stops like right past the elbow. So he can bend like this part a little bit, but he doesn't have a hand on his left side. And he does not wear a prosthetic, but he posted a drawing on Facebook like almost 10 years ago. And it was a drawing of a prosthetic arm that had hollowed out spots to hide candy and drinks to sneak into a movie theater. And he was like, he called it my going to the movies arm. And when he posted it, I screenshotted it like almost a decade ago. As soon as I saw it, and I just knew, I was like, someday I'm going to make this for Ryan. And I've sat on that idea forever. And then because he lives in a different state, he lives in Wisconsin. And I was just like, someday I need to make this for him. And then earlier this year, he was like, hey, I'm going to come see you and come visit you. And so he visited me a couple weeks ago. And while he was here, I measured his arm and I made a cast of it. And then I bought a mannequin off of Facebook Marketplace, and I'm chopping up the arm, and I'm going to hide candy in it. And then I'm going to fly. I'm going to be near him for a speech in like a month and a half. And so I'm going to build him this fake prosthetic arm, and then we're going to go sneak into a movie theater.
You're going to get canceled, like 100%.
Well, so I do have a question. So marathoners, like in this world, everyone has an opinion, and usually they're very willing to share it with you, especially if they don't like it. Yeah. You have to have gotten some hate mail from a marathoner who thought you're bastardizing the bastion of runnerdom. And Kyle, how could you do this? There are people who are
not really. I mean, you're always going to get some of that. There's always people who take themselves too seriously. But I found like when I go give these talks at events, I always tell the marathon story. And there's always somebody in the room that everyone knows is a marathon runner. And a lot of times it's like the boss or, whatever. They're like, this one of their executives, like he's known for marathon running or distance running or whatever. And I'm always like a little nervous about that. And that person is almost always the person who's laughing the hardest. Because I think that they just realize like they take themselves too seriously. But there's like a little bit of like, in the same way that like, realtors can poke fun at themselves for the things that other people like don't like about realtors, because the truth is like some of that comes from a truthful place, and that's probably the thing that you're trying not to do, and you're like, I don't want to come across that way, and maybe I have in the past or whatever. The same thing is true for marathon runners. Like any culture, I think it's good to be able to poke fun at yourself. Like I am I don't like any of my titles. Like I am a motivational speaker. That's my full-time job. I don't like a lot of things about that industry, but I also can see those things and laugh at them. And so when someone is like, oh, you're a motivational speaker, and they, pull up some Chris Farley joke, or they're, making fun of Tony Robbins or something like that, I can, that doesn't impact me as a person, because I don't go like my feelings are hurt. I can laugh at that. And I find that most people can. You've
also had like 20 years of building that muscle, right? Of that.
Yeah.
I think too often we compare ourselves to the after picture, right? Instead of the before picture.
For sure.
Right? Like looking at what you do and thinking I could never do that. Well, if you've never tried to put yourself out there in that way, you're probably right. So don't start a fake marathon, but try something that feels more palatable, but that risk consumption early might be different than risk consumption late, right? But
I would say that, but I would also say, like, I think this was my buddy John Acuff that said this, that he, instead of like, don't compare your before to someone's after, he says, don't compare your blooper reel to someone else's highlight reel.
Yeah.
Because that's the truth of the matter is you're not seeing my after. Because I'm not dead. So like, you're seeing the during, but you're also only seeing the parts of the story that I want to tell you. And so, I think about this a lot. Like I'm doing this like fitness journey right now where I'm losing weight and exercising more. And
running a marathon, Kyle? Are you running a real marathon?
But I have to report to a coach every so often of like my weigh-ins. And if you weight a person minute to minute, like their weight is always going up and down and up and down. And it's really this trend, but we get to pick so sometimes like I'll weigh in and then the next day I weigh in and I'm like 0.2 pounds earlier and or heavier. And I'm like, I'm not putting that in. I'm not sending that to him. I'm going to wait till it goes down again. And then it makes this nice trend. And that's what everyone is doing all of the time, especially on the internet. And so, as a realtor, like if you see somebody and they're sharing all like, oh, I just sold this house. I just sold this house. I just sold this house. They're not sharing like, hey, this house has been on the market for 8 months. The client's a nightmare. We've had to drop the price 6 times. The basement fell into a cave. Like they're not sharing any of that stuff, and none of us are. And so but in your own business, that's all you're thinking about all the time is the stuff that's not working, the stuff that's not going well. And so you can see your own blooper reel really, really well. And you don't see mine unless I tell it to you. And so, I think there's a mix of both those things. Like there's some longevity in there where I didn't start out by chasing, a half or a fake marathon or whatever. But there's also just the fact that like a lot of the stuff I've done over the years has not been some gigantic viral success. But you do enough things and eventually you get something that pops off.
I have a question on that. Sorry, I want to follow up, Keith.
No, go ahead.
Do you think that the general public is, I'm going to ask this the best way I can. Do you think the general public now online on social media is getting tired of it being the highlight reel and actually want to see part of the blooper reel to make people more human? I feel like,
I think that we swing back and forth on that all the time. And there's different pockets of the internet that like different things. But I mean, that was like, you've seen that a little bit on Instagram, where Instagram used to be the place to like post like your most polished, like pictures. And it started as this place of, oh, I'm just going to take a picture of myself on my phone and slap a filter on it. And then it became like so overly polished that I think a lot of people kind of reverted back to, hey, I want to see something real. And the same thing is true on YouTube. There's like this whole like new wave YouTube thing that's happening where it's people that are not sharing the most polished stuff and they're like sharing real life stuff. And so I think the pendulum swings back and forth. I don't think culture ever kind of stays in one place. But I do think when it gets too like polished and too like, look how great my life is, I personally just don't connect with that at all. Like because I'm a human being and I fall on my face all the time and I'm clumsy and I make mistakes. And so when I see another person do that, I go, oh, thank God. I thought I was the only one. So
let me tie it to the comment I was going towards. Was you made this comment about how realtors post, just the highlights of like, we just sold this house and, we got it for 100,000 over asking and blah, blah, blah. I think part of our problem is that we're not actually showing how complicated the work is that's going into doing all of that. And so it's just the highlight reel instead of, and realtor getting, maybe I'm off, I don't know, but it's like you get online and be like, man, y'all think this shit's easy? Like today we had an inspection go south and we had to save a deal. And like, I feel like in our industry, we should do a little less polish and get a little more real about the complexities of what it is to buy and sell a house. And that is incredibly emotional. We play therapists more than anything else half the time. So I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think like to kind of address the elephant in the room with like some of the lawsuits that are happening, some of the just like feelings around the industry. a lot of it is people going, well, how did we land on this particular number for a commission? What is a commission worth? And why is this? What exactly are you doing? You see that feeling from a lot of people. And I think it's coming from what you're talking about, where there is there's some of this hustle bro culture of going like, look at this. I just got my real estate license. And I sold all the blah, 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 blah. And I did this course in 6 weeks or whatever, which is like, yeah, sure. That's true. That's the barrier to entry. It's not particularly high. But that's the beginning. Like that's how you get in. That's not necessarily how you get good at this. And anybody that I know who actually like I know plenty of people who got their real estate license and probably never sold a house. The people that I know that actually do really well with it, they work their butts off and they're constantly like, you know, you're going out to dinner with them and they're taking 3 phone calls during dinner you know, they're and they're building relationships and they're investing in the community and they're like, they're the ones going, oh, I got to figure out how to get this pipe fixed because the inspection's happening in 10 minutes and blah, 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 blah. Like it's a lot of troubleshooting. But that's the side of stuff that doesn't get shared. And I think that maybe by sharing that, you would alleviate some of those questions about, you know, where is this money going and how are you earning it?
Yeah, there's this inherent conflict in because it really is a service business. It's not a sales business, right? Real estate. And it'd be weird if you went to a restaurant and your waiter walked up and said, "Hi, Kyle, I'm Keith. I am the best waiter here at Applebee's." No, shout out Applebee's. I don't know why I picked them, but I'm the best waiter here at Applebee's. I've been here at Applebee's for 20 years and I've got great news. That's why you're going to tip me 30% tonight. Can't wait. What would you like to drink? Right. But that feels very strange in a service business. And real estate, that's what we do. We have to meet you, establish rapport, and then tell you what you're going to get to pay, right? And so, or if you walked into a restaurant and said, and I came up and said, "Kyle, listen, I'm great, but man, we have our B team in the back. Like we have our B team chef today, right? And the dishwasher's sick. Like it's just a hot mess around here. So I'm gonna do my best, but you know, right? Like you don't want to hear all that. You want to have a great experience with your family and all of those things, right? So there's this sort of inherent conflict of we want to let you behind the curtain to see what it's really like. How do you balance that, I guess, is my question is, and this could be for both of you, but how do you balance I'm showing you that it's not all white Mercedes and 2 martinis lunches, right? Because it isn't. But you're not here to learn about how hard my life is either, right? Like, because to your point I
think it has to come from a place of service. I'm not saying, hey, look at how hard it is, but maybe just by showing, like one of the things that I found is when I travel a ton as a speaker, and so I'm on 100 plus airplanes a year. You do that much traveling, you're going to spend the night on the floor of an airport. You're going to have canceled flights. You're going to have to drive through the night a couple times a year to make an event. And so I'll share that stuff online of just going, like, not saying, "Oh, woe is me," but just saying, "Oh man, it's been a crazy day. This is what happened." And I found that like engenders so much empathy with people where they're like, and there are people who just kind of follow me for my travel, like woes where they're like, "Oh, Kyle's stuck at an airport again." And so I think showing, hey, I did all of this so that I could get on that stage, because that's the criticism, like the of my industry is people go, "Oh, you got paid all this money to talk for 1 hour." It's like, well, no, I got paid for all the 15, 20 years of stories that I did to build that hour. And then also like the couple times a year where I'm going to have to burn the midnight oil to get there and like do anything that it takes to be on that stage. And I've had a couple events where like last year I showed up 20 minutes before stage time because American Airlines had different ideas about when I should get to this city. And I was changing pants in the car as someone else was driving me to this event. And so like those are the things. But when you share those things with clients, and then in my industry, like bureau agents hear that, and then you get a reputation as like, Kyle will do whatever it takes to get there. Like he is going to be there. And so it's not about me going, "Oh, my life is so hard." Cause I don't like, it's an adventure for me. Like, a couple of weeks ago, I slept on the floor of the Philadelphia airport for 2 hours before I got a red eye to Boston. Like,
I remember. I'm one of your.
And so I wasn't like, "Oh, this sucks, poor me." But so that's not what I'm sharing. But by sharing the difficult stuff that I've done, then other people are like, "Oh, okay."
It's also setting expectation.
I'm in there.
It's setting expectation too, because you see that and you're like, and you empathize with the person. Keith, to answer your question too, and we'll piggyback on this. I know we got to wrap up, but it's, I agree with you. Like when I go to a restaurant, I don't want to hear that we're down a chef and whatever. But when the server comes over and says, I'm really sorry, we're short. We had somebody that didn't show up today. That's setting expectation so that instead of me expecting to have everything to come out, like, he or she is struggling. And I've now understood that. And so I'm going to be more patient based upon, what's happening. So I think it's, to your point, it's a balance of not too far, but we can't just, if she didn't say that or he didn't say that to me and everything was slow, I would be pissed. But if it was like, we're down 2 staff today, I'm really sorry, I'm going to do the best that I can. I'm going to be very empathetic around that concept. So, anyways. Well, take us home, Keith.
All right. Well, we have a question we ask every guest as our final question. If you were an agent, a brokerage, or an entrepreneur, what's the one thing you'd implement today to help your business?
Oh man, I don't know, because I find I am not in the real estate industry, but I think I would just try to figure out how do I like serve my clients as well as I possibly can, and then how do I tell stories around that? That's my default is I am a storyteller, and I find that human beings connect really well through story. And so whether that's in your marketing or social media or your like in-person outreach, I think that like telling stories of either how you've worked together with people or ways that you've solved problems for clients or how you went, the extra mile for this person or whatever. Those are the ways that that's what people remember. If you told me your sales volume for last year, I would forget it before this call is even over. That's right. I might remember the overall round number. But if you told me a story about a way that, this deal was going to fall through, and I went the extra mile to met with this lender, and I drove across it. I have those stories in my own life of my wife and I bought 10 acres of land, and we tried for years to get it. And then I reached out to a real estate agent, and I was like, hey, every bank I've talked to has said that it's 30 to 50% down on raw land, and we don't have that. And he was like, I personally know a banker. Let me call him. The guy drove, a vice president of a bank, drove across town, shook my hand, and was like, we can do 5% down. And that, I will never forget that. The rest of my I live in the house that I live in today because somebody did that for me. Yeah. And so I think those are the stories that I would be telling, and then I would just be figuring out how do I make sure that I'm getting more stories so that 2 months from now I've got a new one.
That is a really good piece of advice.
Once you fire up your story finder part of your brain, I find for myself, when I start looking for it, I find it more, if that makes any sense. It becomes a sort of self-fulfilling prophecy. And so just start trying to tell 2 stories. And then as you tell your third one, you'll realize a fourth one and a fifth one, it does sort of feed on itself.
Your brain is a pattern recognition machine. And that's why, the day after you buy a white Honda Odyssey, all of a sudden you notice all the other white Honda Odysseys. It's not because you're a trendsetter and everybody copied you. It's because you gave your brain a new pattern to lock onto. And I think a lot of people, this is why I tell people all the time, write down your ideas. If you have an idea, write it down, because what you're doing is you're telling your brain, I value this. And your brain will go, oh man, I've been throwing these in the trash this whole time. I didn't know you wanted these. And you'll keep writing them down. And so you develop this pattern of if it's a good idea, I write it down. If it's a bad idea, I write it down. If it's a story, I write it down. I have an Evernote document that's probably 15 years old now that's just called Stories. And I started it when I became a public speaker because I hadn't even written my talk yet. And I was like, I should just throw a bunch of stories. What are the stories that I tell all the time? And then anytime for 15 years that I have remembered another story, or sometimes someone from college will go, dude, remember when this thing happened? And I'm like, I had forgotten all about that. I just write down the blurb of it. It'll just, the time a squirrel got into the whatever. And I'm I know the rest of that story, but now 15 years later, that document is worth so much to me because I have, I don't know, probably hundreds of things in there. And there's funny stories, there's meaningful stories, there's kind of observational comedy, there's all this stuff in there. And I guarantee you, if I had not had that practice of I'm going to have this document and I'm going to keep it up to date, I would remember maybe 1% of those stories.
Yeah.
And so, I think that you're right. Once you build that habit, your brain just starts going, okay, this is the new thing that we're doing.
We got to get better at storytelling in our industry. It's a great way to end this, Kyle. Like, it's a really good comment. Share the client story. Stop talking about your production. Nobody gives a shit. It's really about what the experiences are and how they can relate to that. So,
absolutely.
Kyle, thanks, my friend. It was awesome to have you here.
Thank you.
We'll
Always
put a
a
bunch
pleasure.
of stuff in the show links for some of the crazy ideas that you've done, as well as some of the books that you've done. You have a new kids book out too. Is that right? Did I get that right?
Yeah.
Second kids book, right?
A Sunday with Everything on It, which is the sequel to A Pizza with Everything on It. Both very silly, very heartfelt, ridiculous books.
Awesome.
I own both. The 6-year-old enjoys them. We will link to them in the show notes if anyone wants to order both of those books.
Awesome.
Kyle, you're awesome.
Thank you guys so much. You're
Thanks,
awesome.
my friend.
Thanks for
Have a good
being
one.
here.
Appreciate
Good
it.
time.
Talk to you soon.
It's our job to say out loud what everybody's only thinking to themselves. It's your job to subscribe to this podcast so you never miss an episode.